So this episode, we're going to talk about wills and trusts, which is something a lot of the officers that I've talked to have brought that up. That's like the one question, hey, can you find out about wills and trusts? And I didn't know anything. I don't have one. That's a bad on my part. I don't know anything about it. So to me, this series with our guest, Cindy Starkey, is very exciting because I don't know anything about it. I know I need to get one, and I don't know the difference between wills and trusts, but I don't know about you. I don't know anything about them, so
we're going to find out about them, so stay tuned if you want to hear more or learn yourself. Welcome to the Cedar Harvest Show, where financial education meets real-life choices that impact your family, your future, and your legacy. I'm your host, Mario Lizarraga, and on this podcast, we get real. We connect everyday people with trusted professionals who break down the tough stuff: pensions, tax planning, insurance, and today, estate planning. This episode is part of our law enforcement series, and I'm joined by my co-host, Officer Tara, an 18-year seasoned veteran in the field. Our guest today is Cindy Starkey, a powerhouse attorney with 35 years of experiences in wills, trusts, and probate law. She's the owner of Cynthia D. Starkey, PLLC, and has guided thousands of families through some of life's hardest moments. Today, we're answering a tough question. Is your will just a document or a disaster waiting to happen? So on that note, welcome, Cindy, and let's do this. Let's rock the house. Welcome back, Officer Bill. Excited for another powerful episode, and I don't know, we got a lot to talk about. So, where do we begin, Miss Starkey, Esquire?
Well, I'm happy to be here, and nice to meet you, Officer Ty.
Nice to meet you.
Mario. I guess we could start with, why do police officers need a trust?
That's a great place.
That's a very good question. Excited for this one because I have a lot of questions about this stuff, and I don't really know a lot about it. So I'm excited for this one.
Do you have a will or a trust, Officer Ty?
No.
I mean, you definitely need one. Really, everybody needs a will or a trust. That is the reality. But police officers and first responders probably need them more than anybody because, as you know, you put your life on the line every time you go to work. You could be out there and get incapacitated or killed, and you need to have a will or a trust in place because that tells people who you want to act on your behalf if something were to happen to you, and it tells your family members how you want to distribute your estate in the event that, something did happen to you on the job. I don't know what the statistics are for law enforcement, but your mortality rate has to be lower than,
I believe so. 67 years old is what we saw.
Yeah, it's not good even when they retire too. Right. I mean, we should pull that up sometime, but the stats aren't very good.
Well, we saw it the other day. Remember, we were looking into it, and I think it was lower than a firefighter. And I thought firefighters were at the lowest, but police officers actually are 1 year behind the average firefighter, male.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when we started, that was one of the little spiels they gave us was about taking care of yourself, because it was something like, most police officers it's like 5 years after they retire, there's a lot of them that pass away from, heart disease, all kinds of laundry list of things. So
it's a stressful job that's going to impact your health.
Part of it. For the sleep deprivation is a big part of it too. You guys, your erratic sleep patterns.
Well, yeah, third shift. I always tell people I enjoyed working third shift, but after a time that really starts to really drain your body, and you can't. I don't know how to describe it unless you've been through it, but it definitely affects you in negative ways.
And my sister works third shift, and it's hell on your body, really and truly. And a lot of people don't think about putting their estate planning in place and getting a will or trust until, they're elderly. Things start to get to the 70s, and they're like, oh, it could be the end of the road. Maybe it's time to start planning. But really, everybody needs to plan sooner rather than later, because you never really know how much time you have. And especially if you have small children, even if you don't have a lot of assets that you need to dispose of, you should, if you have an estate plan in place, either a will or trust, then it can provide for who takes care of your children if something happens to you, and also can determine who handles the money, because that's not always going to be the same person. The person that you want to raise your children, if something were to happen to you and you have minor children, not necessarily the same person you want to handle your money. Like, for example, I would probably have left my kids to my sister. I would never have let her handle.
You'll have to cut that out.
Yeah. Oh, we have to cut that out.
I'm gonna watch this podcast. You've seen it.
She doesn't care.
You might be getting a phone call later.
But it is important to have an estate plan in place. And there's a number of different ways that you could do it. You could do a will or a trust, there are other mechanisms that you could also use in order to distribute your property after your death.
So on that note, would you, I don't know about you, but I'm pretty confused about really the differences in wills and trusts. I know the trusts are more robust, and I don't know if that's like a legal entity. I kind of get confused by the whole thing. I know it's just pertaining to when we pass on, but I don't really get it.
Yeah, and that was my question too. Like, what would be, I guess, benefit for each one? Why would somebody consider a will? Why would they consider a trust? And like, what situation would maybe I do a trust instead of a will? Like, vice versa. Like, what would like, especially for a police officer, like, what would make me want to do a trust instead of a will, or whatever?
Well, that's a really good question, and there are very big differences between wills and trusts. A will only takes effect once you die. A trust you could put into place, and it could manage your money. A trustee acts on behalf of you, and it's typically you or your wife are the trustee of your trust, but it could be somebody else. But that can take place. That can become effective immediately to manage your money. So if you were incapacitated and not killed, your trust takes effect, but the will only takes effect once you pass away.
Oh, maybe.
Um,
Okay.
Big difference. Yeah. A will, you have control over all your assets up until the day you die. Trust, technically not, because the trustee is the person who's acting on your behalf. But in reality, most people appoint themselves, or if it's a spouse, they appoint themselves and their spouse as a trustee of the trust until the time that they're incapacitated or they die. Wills have to go through probate, which means you have to go to court. And there's a lot of reasons why that makes a big difference. Trusts are administered completely outside court. You don't have any court approval. So it's a much easier, less
But
complex.
just a seamless transition, it sounds like.
That's correct. So wills tend to be less expensive on the front end because you're not, it's usually just a will, a power of attorney, a healthcare power of attorney, and a durable power of attorney. I do all my will package, all my estate planning packages or estate planning documents in packages. So if I do a will package, it's a will, a healthcare power of attorney, and a financial power of attorney. And if it's a trust package, then it's a whole host of documents: the trust, the will that goes along with it, the powers of attorney, a deed to transfer your property, the funding instructions. I'm trying to think, an assignment, and then we actually have to fund the trust. So it's a much bigger package. So the trust tends to be more expensive at the very beginning, while the will is cheaper in the beginning. But when you pass away and you use your will, you have to go to court and file a probate, which becomes more expensive because then you have to hire a lawyer to file the documents. You have to have the court to approve everything, and there's filing fees and publication fees and things. So in the long run, a will doesn't end up saving you money. A trust ends up saving you money in the long run, but it is more expensive in the short term.
And so, do all trusts then come with the will? Is that just part of it if you're going to do it?
Yep, they all do, and it's a special kind of will called a pour-over will, and the reason why it's called that is because, the most important thing about a trust is that you fund it. If you get a trust, you could have the best trust in the world, but if you don't remember to put your assets in it, it does you absolutely no good at all. When you die, you have to go to court and you have to, file a probate and open a probate. Don't wanna do that. So it's very important that you fund your trust, and sometimes, you get busy. When you first do your trust, you try and put all the assets you have at the time that you're doing your trust into your trust. But sometimes life goes on, you buy, you trade in vehicles, get new vehicles, buy a old, trade in your house and get a new house. You might buy a vacation property, you might buy expensive jewelry or something else that has a title, like, I don't know, do guns have titles?
No, but some of them can be pretty pricey that you'd want to,
So
especially now.
as life goes on, sometimes, it's been 5 years since you did your trust, you might forget to put something in it when you buy something. And so, the pour over will pours over anything that you left out of your trust into your trust so that you don't have to open a probate up to $75,000. Once you pass that $75,000 cumulative value limit, then you got to go to court to transfer that property, and you've defeated the whole purpose of having a trust.
Oh, because it's outside of the trust.
Yeah, because only the things that are put into the trust title, that are retitled into the name of the trust, end up in the trust and can pass pursuant to that trust document. And then everything else is outside of it and either passes through your pour over will, or if you've exceeded that amount, then you have to go to court. Then the court has to probate what's left of your estate. So that's a bad thing. You don't want that to happen.
Well, I kind of had that happen to me with the girls' insurance policies.
Oh,
Because we didn't put the owner of the policy, we left it in my grandmother's name.
okay. And she had passed away, right?
And she passed away, and we had to go to probate. I guess it avoided probate because it was under 10,000 or whatever the threshold was. Cindy helped me with that.
Okay.
But we did. We had to do you had to do a couple documents that had to be submitted to the court. But we avoided probate because it was underneath the value of the life insurance contract at the time was underneath that threshold. But it's still such a hassle, and it took a lot of time. And we couldn't we couldn't transfer ownership to my mom. She was the next of kin.
Yeah.
And it would have been so simple. And my grandma had a trust, but to your point, we didn't transfer those assets. We didn't, I guess what you're referring to as funded, right? Which funding isn't just writing a check. It's about getting all the assets into it is what sounds like you're meaning by that.
How does a pension work with that? Is that like funded into it too, or how does that?
So pensions typically expire when you expire, unless you've made a provision so that your spouse gets a continuing benefit. And there are certain things that you're never going to want to put in a trust, or I shouldn't say never, because you might want to title them as a contingent beneficiary just so that there's always somebody there who can take ownership of it. But typically, anything that's a federally qualified retirement benefit, like a 401k, an IRA, those kinds of assets, you might have when I worked for the Attorney General's office, we had deferred compensation plan. So we had a big chunk of money in a deferred compensation plan. Things like that, you don't want to title into the name of your trust because under the IRS statutes, and I'm no expert, I would talk to a CPA, but if you have an item like that, there are different rules for how it has to be passed and distributed. So if it goes into a trust, I know that it has to be distributed within 1 year, and there's tax consequences to that. Because say you have $500,000 in a qualified IRA, and you have to take 500,000 within 1 year, then you're getting taxed on that 500,000. Whereas if you have a spouse and you leave it to a spouse or a child or a person, they can take it out over the course of 5 or 10 years when they need it the most so that it benefits them more tax-wise. So if they have a really low earning year, they might want to take more out. If they have a high earning year, they'll want to take less out just at the end of the 5 years or the 10 years. As long as they've distributed the entire amount, they're okay under the IRS regulations. So those are the kinds of things that you're not going to want to put in a trust. And if it ends when you die, like a pension, that wouldn't go into a trust anyhow because there's nothing left. That makes sense, Mario? You look confused.
Well, you just said a lot, and you went into qualified. I thought we were talking about pensions, but yeah, there's a lot going on here. This is a big conversation. So, and I'm really excited because this is going to be one of many conversations that we're going to really kind of break down these certain subjects.
Probably have a whole episode on funding a trust.
Yeah, well, that's a good one.
That's a good idea.
Right. And again, it's so, and which ones are going to be more applicable, right? Because you have different situations going on, with your off duty options and then, second careers and.
Yeah, so what I was thinking too, I'd like to get into now, but even like once I retire, into more like investing type stuff and like real estate investing. And you always hear people talking about putting, and I don't know so you would know, like having would you do separate trust for, like, say you buy an investment property, you buy a multifamily or whatever, would you want that in the same trust with all this other stuff, or would you want it its own separate deal where it's by itself?
So ideally, if you're getting into real estate investment, you want a different LLC established for each property that you own,
Okay.
because that protects. Then if you have a catastrophic event at a rental home, somebody dies in the pool, drowns in the pool or something, then they can only attach, if there's a lawsuit, they can only attach the equity and the value of that asset, and all other assets are protected so long as you're not commingling assets. But when you're investing in real estate, and if you're going to have multiple pieces of property, I would recommend that you do a separate LLC for every single property.
And have a trust for those two, like a separate trust with each one?
Or the owner be the trust.
What you do
Can the
is
owner be a trust? I mean, could the owner of the LLC be a trust?
the owner of the LLC could be a trust. What you'd want, let me think this through. So what you want to do, you'd have each business in a separate, each piece of property in a separate LLC, and then you put that LLC into your trust, because you can put LLCs and partnerships and businesses that you own as into your trust, and that's how you'd want to do it. So there's extra layers of protection, but
So if somebody came after it, like came after the trust, or say like you that scenario, they're coming after one of the properties, they'd only get that one LLC or whatever it's under, and that's how you okay.
yeah,
They're
so long.
protecting that one, yeah. You're saving it from your other stuff. It won't. Okay.
So can I ask you a question here? When you say put it in the trust, again, are you meaning you're titling it to the trust?
That's correct.
Okay, that's which we might putting it in the trust. Okay, so the owner is in essence the trust.
Okay.
And that's what you
Yeah,
can figure out.
with that.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, I just said I've seen people talk about that too, having a trust. I just couldn't remember if it was something where they set up a trust for in an LLC for everyone they own. But that makes sense. You have a trust, but then you have an LLC for each one, and then put it. Okay.
And you could do it either way, but if you want to be, it's nice to have it all in one place in your, in your main trust, and have separate LLCs. As long as you're not commingling money, you're going to be able to protect and keep the exposure to that property and the value of that property only. But if you have all of your property in your one trust, your main family trust, that kind of gives a roadmap to the person who's left behind, who has to administer your trust. They know everything that they need to collect. Because here's what you do when somebody passes away, whether it's a will or a trust. If it's a will, the personal representative collects all the property, goes to court and says, here's all the property that this person owned. Here's the will that says this is how it's supposed to be distributed. And they ask the court to, rubber stamp it and say, yes, that's fine. And everybody signs off on, yes, we agree that this is the way it's supposed to be distributed. If it's a will and you have to go to court, it's a really time consuming process, which is another reason why trust is more beneficial. If you go the will route, you not only have to file with the court, but you have to file a notice and publish it in the newspapers to put all creditors on notice that you have died, and that if they have any claim against your estate, they can make a claim against the estate by filing a document with the court. And you have to publish that, and then you have to wait 4 months and sit there and do nothing for 4 months and just wait for creditors to show up and say, I have a claim against their estate. And if they don't file that document within the 4 months, then they're barred from collecting it, as long as long as your personal representative didn't know about it. But otherwise, you're just sitting there for 4 months doing nothing. So usually it will take like a year to get an estate probated from start to finish. And it'll probably cost around $5,000, maybe more, a lot more if it's contested. So that's the back end expense of a will, where the trust is not even that expensive on the front end, and you don't have any of those expenses because you don't have any waiting period. You don't have to file anything with the court. There's no fees. You might want to hire an attorney to give you advice if your trustee has questions about how to administer the trust, but their involvement is going to be way less than if you had to actually file a probate because you had a will.
Hmm. Can I ask you a question? So let's back up a little bit and just go with today's scenario.
Okay.
Right now, you don't have a will
I don't have
or a trust,
yes.
right? Heaven forbid there's an accident on the job, right? So kind of where's his family at? Because there's nothing in place.
Okay, so then you still have to go and file a probate with the court, but it's an intestate probate, which means there's no will. And that's even a little bit more complicated. So if you have a will that appoints somebody as a personal representative, then you go and you can file something called an informal probate. And that is a little bit more streamlined, a little bit less expensive, a little bit less court oversight. But when you don't have a will and something happens to you, now you have to go to court and file a formal probate. And the Arizona statutes say who has priority to be the personal representative. It's spouse, and then children, and then parents, and then, it goes out brothers and sisters and keeps going, further and further family relations. With a spouse, it's not a big deal because, your spouse is gonna be the one who is your personal representative. If you have 3 children, I have an estate a probate right now. There's 2 children, and both are disagreeing with who should be the personal representative, and they both are equal. They have equal priority under the statute because it just says children. It doesn't matter who's older or who's younger, who's smarter, who's better educated. Now you have to go to the court if they won't agree, and you have to ask the judge to appoint the best person. Not a good situation.
So
When
it's at the discretion of the judge after he interviews both parties.
it's at the discretion of the judge, and it's gonna cost a lot of money. A lot of estates getting eaten up by court fees if there's disagreement among the beneficiaries. And one of the ways to make sure there are no disagreements is to have everything in writing in a will or trust that says, this is who I want to act on my behalf. This is where all my assets are going. You might have special things that you want to get. I want to give a gun collection to my son. I want to give jewelry to my daughter. But if you lay it all out, then there's a lot less chance that there's going to be conflict and your estate's going to be eaten up in legal fees.
Sounds like you better get a will, buddy. I know. Sounds like I need to get a will too. Or a trust. We both need trust.
It's funny.
First and foremost.
I'm sure she knows that they do that Wills for Heroes thing, and I've meant to do that a lot of times because, like when I was in law school, one of my professors did that. She would go down to whenever they do it at the Coliseum, I think, when they do it sometimes, and they'll have them all show up and do it. But
Or really just pro bono, a bunch of people just, you guys, attorneys just come and just, it's like waiting a year.
yeah, it's like once a year they do it for like first responders, firefighter, like stuff like that, military guys. They do that that dental thing, I think, in the same thing. Like they help all veterans who need like dental work and do wills for them. Yeah.
That's a really good program. I take advantage of it if you don't have anything, it's worthwhile taking advantage of. I think the attorneys do it pro bono. They're just estate planning attorneys and they show up on the day, and whoever shows up, it's just a general form. So you're going to get the most basic estate plan, but it's still far better than nothing.
It's better than nothing. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we got to get something in place because otherwise that's a mess. Sounds like. Yeah. Well, cool. I mean, this is obviously a big, massive topic. And Cindy, I want to thank you for coming on and being part of this and being a guest on our show. We're trying to peel back a lot of different subjects and topics that, a lot of law enforcement officers, as you know, we have a lot of that in my family. So I'm fortunate enough to be kind of quasi related to Cindy here, full disclosure.
Yeah.
And so we just have a lot of law enforcement in our family,
Yeah.
and so I definitely have heard their challenges, and that's what our show is all about.
Yeah.
Right. It's trying to bring just not only basic information, but more detailed information for those people who do want to deep dive a little deeper. And I definitely look forward to working with you further, Cindy, and helping us understand a little bit more about what's just, I don't know, to me, a very terrible subject.
Yeah. I think, I just have to say it. I'm sorry, right out here, but I just like, I'll do it. It's probably why a lot of people put it off because it's not something you want to talk about having to die, like
It's like, well, you need full life insurance. It's like, yeah, life insurance, yeah, wills of trust.
plan this because that means
Right?
That is why a lot of people put it off, and that's why it's really important not to put it off because you really don't know how long you have. I have a client who her mom died without a will. She had COPD, but she was not that sick, and she was 55 years old and she died. She thought she had another 20 years at least left, and so it's not a pleasant topic, but it's really an important topic. You leave a big mess for the people left behind. It costs more money and it's harder on the family when like this daughter had no idea what her mom wanted done. She had no idea what her assets were. And so it just makes it's really, you're doing your family a service by going and getting your estate plan taken care of.
yeah.
So if we don't have one, nobody uses the, what do you call it? Heroes? What's it?
Wills for Heroes.
Wills for Heroes. They can always go to Cynthia D. Starkey website, I'm assuming.
Go look you up online. Show notes.
Yeah, right. And we'll get you the show. We'll
Put the website in the show notes.
a little plug out there. So again, thank you very much for coming on, and I look forward to future episodes. And this was a great beginning.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
All right. So there you. All right. Another one done.
Another one done.